December 15th, 1943. The bitter wind howled through the narrow streets of Heidelberg, Germany, as Lieutenant Thomas Pearson adjusted his civilian overcoat and checked his reflection in a shop window. At 24 years of age, with his carefully cultivated German accent and meticulously crafted backstory as a Swiss banking clerk, he was confident his cover would hold. The Office of Strategic Services had assured him that his mission, to gather intelligence on industrial production in the region, would be straightforward. They could not have been more mistaken. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. What began as a routine intelligence operation would transform into a profound journey that would challenge everything Lieutenant Pearson believed about humanity, loyalty, and the true nature of courage during one of history's darkest chapters. Through an unlikely marriage of convenience and a terrible discovery, he would witness how the facade of evil could mask unexpected virtue, and how true heroism often remained hidden in plain sight. The briefing had been clear. Thomas Pearson, now operating under the alias Thomas Bauer, was to establish himself in Heidelberg, a university town that had been largely spared from bombing due to its minimal industrial significance. His mission was to gather intelligence on nearby manufacturing facilities that American intelligence believed were being converted to support the German war effort. The OSS had chosen him for several reasons: his fluency in German, learned from his immigrant grandmother, his background in engineering that would help him understand industrial capabilities, and his unremarkable appearance that allowed him to blend into crowds. Colonel Howard Richards, Thomas's handler and the architect of the operation, had explained the plan with characteristic precision during their final meeting in London. "Pearson, your cover identity is watertight. Thomas Bauer, age 24, Swiss national, banking clerk with a medical exemption from military service due to a heart murmur," Colonel Richards said, sliding a manila folder across the desk. "You have legitimate papers from our contacts in Bern. Your job will be at the Heidelberg branch of the Schweizer Kreditanstalt. The manager there is one of our assets. How will I access the information we need, sir?" Thomas asked, studying the identification papers that would become his life for the foreseeable future. "That is where things get interesting," Richards replied, lighting a cigarette. "We have identified a potential residence that offers unique advantages. A widow named Elsa Hoffman, 68 years old, owns a large house near the university. She rents rooms occasionally, and her late husband was a respected engineer, with connections to several manufacturing facilities in the region. More importantly, her home sits on a hill with excellent views of the railway lines that transport materials to and from these facilities." "You want me to rent a room from her?" "We want you to marry her," Richard stated flatly. Thomas nearly choked on his coffee. "I beg your pardon, sir. As a foreign national in wartime Germany, your movements will be restricted and scrutinized. As the husband of a respected German widow, you gain legitimacy, freedom of movement, and access to social circles that would otherwise be closed to you. The lady in question is well connected, but in declining financial circumstances. Our intelligence suggests she would be amenable to an arrangement that provides financial security." Thomas stared at his superior, trying to determine if this was some kind of test. "Colonel, with all due respect, the age difference alone makes it perfect," Richards interrupted. "No one will suspect a romantic entanglement. It will be understood as a marriage of convenience. Such arrangements are not uncommon in wartime. Mrs. Hoffman gains financial security, and you gain a German wife, which provides considerable protection. The local authorities are much less likely to question a man married to one of their respected citizens." Thomas remembered that conversation now, as he approached the address he had memorized. Elsa Hoffman's house stood on Philosophenweg, the famous Philosopher's Walk that overlooked the old town and the Neckar River. It was an imposing 3-story stone structure with a steeply pitched roof and small dormer windows. Despite some signs of needed repairs, it retained an air of faded elegance. As arranged through intermediaries, Thomas knocked on the heavy wooden door precisely at 4 o'clock. He heard slow, measured footsteps before the door opened to reveal a tall, thin woman with steel-grey hair pulled back in a severe bun. Despite her advanced age, Elsa Hoffmann stood remarkably straight, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to evaluate Thomas down to his soul. "Herr Bauer, I presume," she said in a crisp, educated tone. "Yes, Frau Hoffmann. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me," Thomas replied in his carefully practiced German. She gestured him inside without a smile. "Punctuality is a virtue I appreciate. Come in before you let all the heat escape." The interior of the house was as Thomas had been briefed, spacious, but showing signs of economic hardship. The furniture was of excellent quality but worn, and there were rectangular discolorations on the walls where paintings had likely been sold. She led him to a sitting room where tea had been prepared. "I understand you are interested in a rather unusual arrangement," Elsa said once they were seated, pouring tea with steady hands. "I believe our mutual acquaintances explained the situation," Thomas replied. Referring to the resistance contacts who had made the introduction, "I require permanent residency status that only marriage to a German citizen can provide, and I require financial security in increasingly difficult times," she finished for him, her expression betraying no emotion. "Let us not pretend this is anything but a business transaction, Herr Bauer. I am not a sentimental woman, and at my age I have no interest in romantic notions. I appreciate your directness, Frau Hoffmann." She studied him over the rim of her teacup. "Before I agree to anything, I must know what you intend to do here in Heidelberg. My reputation is at stake." Thomas delivered his prepared response smoothly. "I have secured a position at the Schweizer Kreditanstalt. Switzerland remains neutral, but our banking relationships with German businesses continue. My heart condition prevented military service, but I can contribute to maintaining economic stability." "A banker with a heart condition," she repeated, her gaze unwavering. "How convenient." For a moment Thomas feared his cover was already blown, but Elsa simply set down her cup and continued. "My terms are straightforward. You will provide monthly financial support of 1,000 Reichsmarks. We will maintain separate bedrooms. You will be expected to behave as a respectful husband in public. I host a monthly gathering of friends. You will attend and be cordial. In return, you gain German protection through marriage and a respectable address. Does this satisfy your requirements?" Thomas nodded, relieved at her businesslike approach. "It does. And may I add that my banking position comes with certain privileges that might help ease wartime shortages. I would ensure this household does not want for essentials." Something flickered in Elsa's eyes, perhaps interest, perhaps suspicion. "That would be appreciated. Rationing has become increasingly severe." Within 2 weeks, a small civil ceremony made Thomas Bauer officially the husband of Elsa Hoffmann, now Elsa Bauer. The few attendees were elderly friends of Elsa who seemed more curious than disapproving of the match. The local officials processed the paperwork with minimal questioning. Marriages of convenience had indeed become common as the war progressed and economic hardships mounted. Thomas settled into the daily routine of his banking position, which served as an excellent cover for his true work. Each evening, he would record train movements visible from his bedroom window, noting cargo types, frequencies, and destinations. He established a wireless schedule with London, transmitting in brief bursts from various locations to avoid detection. His marriage to Elsa provided exactly the cover and freedom of movement the OSS had anticipated. What Thomas had not anticipated was the complex household he had entered. Elsa employed 2 people: Maria Gruber, a housekeeper in her 50s who viewed Thomas with undisguised suspicion, and Jakob Weber, a groundskeeper and handyman of about 70 who had worked for the Hoffmann family for decades. Both were fiercely loyal to Elsa, and Thomas realized they represented potential risks to his cover. The first month passed without incident. Thomas established his routines, carefully built his banking cover, and began mapping the manufacturing facilities in the region. Elsa maintained her distance, their interactions formal but civil. They took evening meals together, during which she would read from the newspaper or discuss mundane matters. Thomas noted that she never expressed political opinions or discussed the war directly, which he initially attributed to caution around him as a foreigner. The first significant crack in the facade came during the monthly gathering Elsa hosted for her friends. 8 elderly guests arrived, all from Heidelberg's educated elite, a retired university professor, a doctor and his wife, a former judge, and several others with connections to Heidelberg's institutions. Thomas played his role as the polite, somewhat reserved Swiss husband, answering questions about banking and Switzerland with practiced ease. As the evening progressed, the conversation inevitably turned to the war. Thomas listened carefully, alert for any valuable intelligence. What he heard, however, was not what he expected. "The food shortages in the East are becoming catastrophic," the doctor, Dieter Schmidt, commented quietly. "My colleague returned from Poland last month. What he described—" "We must be careful what we discuss," interrupted another guest, glancing meaningfully at Thomas. Elsa's response surprised him. "My husband can be trusted, Conrad. Not everyone wearing a German uniform supports what is happening." A heavy silence fell over the room, and Thomas realized he had stumbled into something unexpected. These were not enthusiastic supporters of the regime, as many of Germany's upper class were. There was something else happening in this circle. Later that night, after the guests had departed, Thomas helped Elsa clear the glasses and plates, noting how she moved more stiffly than usual. "Your friends are quite interesting," he ventured. "They speak quite freely." Elsa regarded him steadily. "We have known each other for many decades through the Great War, the Republic, and now this current situation. In such times, one must know whom one can trust." "And they trust you?" "They do. The question, Herr Bauer, is whether I can trust you." Thomas maintained his cover. "I am a Swiss banker who has entered a mutually beneficial arrangement with you. Nothing more." "Indeed," she replied, but her tone suggested she was unconvinced. "We shall see." Over the following weeks, Thomas began to notice peculiar patterns in the household. Elsa received unusual visitors at odd hours, claiming they were former students seeking advice. Jakob, the groundskeeper, made frequent trips to the university library, returning with books that were immediately taken to the cellar. Maria, the housekeeper, made twice the amount of bread that the household could consume, yet there were never any leftovers by morning. Most concerning of all, Thomas began to hear faint sounds from the cellar at night. Movement, muffled conversations, even what sounded like children's voices on one occasion. His spy training told him these were warning signs that demanded investigation, but his mission parameters required maintaining his cover at all costs. The mystery deepened when Thomas encountered Jacob one evening, carrying medical supplies into the house. When questioned, the old man had muttered something about Elsa's rheumatism and hurried away. Thomas knew for certain that the amount of bandages and antiseptic was far more than would be needed for one elderly woman's joint pain. By his third month in Heidelberg, Thomas had established a valuable intelligence network. His banking position allowed him to track financial transactions related to the manufacturing facilities, while his observations from the house provided data on transportation patterns. He had identified 3 factories converted to produce aircraft components and determined their production capacity based on supply deliveries. His reports to London were met with commendation. Yet the mystery of Elsa Hoffmann's household activities continued to gnaw at him. If she was involved in something illegal or subversive, it could threaten his cover and mission. He decided he needed to investigate. His opportunity came when Elsa announced she would be visiting friends in Stuttgart for 2 days. As soon as her train departed, Thomas began a systematic search of the house, careful to leave everything undisturbed. The main floors revealed nothing unusual, but when he approached the cellar door, he found it locked, something that had not been the case previously. Using his OSS training, Thomas picked the lock and descended the stone steps quietly. The cellar was dimly lit and divided into several rooms. Most contained the expected items: wine racks, preserved foods, coal and household supplies. However, the last room, behind a heavy wooden door, revealed something that stopped Thomas cold. The space had been converted into a small living quarters with 6 narrow cots, currently empty but clearly in use. A cabinet contained medical supplies, and a small table held schoolbooks and children's drawings. On a pegboard hung several sets of children's clothing, and beneath a cot, Thomas discovered a stuffed bear with a sewn-on Star of David. The terrible secret crystallized in his mind with shocking clarity. Elsa Hoffmann, the respectable German widow, was hiding Jewish children in her cellar, an act that would result in immediate execution if discovered by the authorities. Thomas carefully replaced everything and returned upstairs, his mind racing. This discovery put him in an impossible position. As an American spy, his mission was to gather intelligence, not to become involved in resistance activities that could compromise his cover. Yet as a human being, he could not ignore what he had found, especially when his presence in the house potentially added to the danger these children faced. When Elsa returned from Stuttgart, Thomas observed her more carefully. She moved with the stiffness of age, but also with a purposeful energy that belied her years. That evening, as they sat across from each other at dinner, he made a decision that would alter the course of his mission. "The cellar door was locked yesterday," he said casually, watching her reaction. "I needed to check the coal supply." Elsa's hand froze momentarily as she reached for her water glass, the only indication that his words had affected her. Jakob must have locked it. He's become forgetful in recent years. "I found another key," Thomas continued, maintaining direct eye contact. "The room at the far end is quite interesting." All pretense dropped from Elsa's face. She set down her fork and regarded him with a mixture of defiance and resignation. "And what do you intend to do with this discovery, Herr Bauer, or whatever your real name might be?" The accusation caught Thomas off guard. "What do you mean?" Elsa gave a small humorless laugh. "I was married to one of Germany's leading electrical engineers for 40 years, Herr Bauer. I have hosted scientists, industrialists, and military officials in this home for decades. Did you truly believe I would not recognize that your interest in local manufacturing facilities goes beyond normal banking concerns? Your Swiss accent is excellent, but occasionally you speak German with American patterns." Thomas felt the blood drain from his face. His cover was blown. His training dictated immediate extraction protocols, but he remained seated, knowing that more than his mission was at stake now. "Who have you told?" he asked quietly. "No one," Elsa replied. "Just as I assume you have told no one about what you found in my cellar. It appears we both have secrets worth keeping." A tense silence stretched between them before Thomas spoke again. "There were 6 cots," Elsa nodded. 6 children, ages 6 to 12. Their parents have already been taken. Some were my former students' children. Others were brought to me through the underground network. They are moved every few weeks to different safe houses. But while they are here, they are my responsibility. That's why you agreed to marry me, Thomas realized. Not just for the money. For the extra ration cards, she confirmed. And because a house with a new husband draws less suspicion than an elderly widow living alone. The revelation staggered Thomas. He had been using Elsa as cover for his espionage, while she had been using him as cover for her rescue operation. The irony might have been amusing in other circumstances. "Where are the children now?" he asked. "Being moved to another location. They will return in 4 days. By then, I assume you will have reported me to your American superiors and disappeared." Thomas considered his options. His mission was to gather intelligence on German industrial capacity to help the Allied bombing campaign, a mission that was saving lives by shortening the war. But before him sat an elderly woman who was risking immediate execution to save 6 innocent children. "My name is Thomas Pearson," he said finally. "I am with the American Office of Strategic Services. My mission is to report on manufacturing and transportation in this region." Elsa showed no surprise at his confession. "And now you must decide whether to continue that mission or to report what I am doing." "Why would I report you?" "Because my activities endanger your operation. Because aiding Jews is considered treason against the Reich, and association with me could lead to your capture and interrogation." Thomas leaned forward. "Frau Hoffmann, Elsa, I have no intention of reporting your activities. In fact, I want to help." For the first time since he had met her, Elsa looked genuinely surprised. Why would an American spy risk his mission to help German children? "Because they're not German children or Jewish children. They're just children," Thomas replied. "And this war won't mean anything if we forget that." That night marked a turning point in their relationship. Elsa revealed the full scope of her resistance activities. Beyond hiding the children, she was part of a network that falsified papers and arranged safe transport for those persecuted by the regime. Her late husband's scientific connections, provided her with access to information and resources that proved invaluable to the resistance. Over the next several months, Thomas maintained his intelligence gathering while also supporting Elsa's rescue operations. His banking position allowed him to divert funds to support the underground network, while his OSS training helped improve their security protocols. He convinced Elsa to move the children from the cellar to a hidden room on the 3rd floor, which would be safer in case of bombing. What Thomas had not anticipated was how this dual role would affect him personally. The cold analytical distance required for intelligence work began to erode as he came to know the children Elsa protected. They came and went every few weeks, some moving on to Switzerland or other safer locations, new ones arriving in the dead of night, often traumatized and malnourished. One child in particular, a 7-year-old girl named Hannah, became special to Thomas. She had arrived alone, her parents taken during a raid in Frankfurt. Unlike the others who remained fearful and withdrawn, Hannah eventually warmed to Thomas, following him around the house when the children were allowed upstairs during the day. "Are you really Elsa's husband?" she asked him one afternoon as he repaired a broken chair in the kitchen. "Yes, I am," he replied, careful with the hammer around small fingers. "But you're not old like her," Hannah observed with a child's directness. Thomas smiled. "No, I'm not. My father says sometimes people get married for strange reasons during war." The comment, so innocently delivered yet so profound, caught Thomas off guard. "Your father sounds like a wise man." Hannah nodded solemnly. "He said we have to remember who we are, even when everyone tells us we're something else." Through these children, the abstract goals of Thomas's mission became concrete and immediate. Each intelligence report he transmitted was not just about bombing factories, it was about ending the war that had created millions of Hannahs across Europe. In April 1944, Thomas's handler in London requested intelligence on a specific manufacturing facility outside Heidelberg that was suspected of producing guidance components for the new V-rockets. The facility was heavily guarded, and direct surveillance was deemed too risky. Thomas remembered that Elsa had mentioned her husband had colleagues who had been forced to work on military projects. That evening, he asked her about possible contacts with knowledge of the facility. "Werner Kleinmann," she said after some consideration. "He worked with my husband at the university. Last I heard, he was conscripted to work at that facility because of his expertise in precision instruments. Can you arrange a meeting?" Elsa frowned. "It would be dangerous. Werner is watched closely, but possible. Perhaps. He comes to the university library every Thursday to research technical journals. It's the only freedom he has." The following Thursday, Thomas accidentally encountered Professor Kleinmann in the university library. The man was in his 60s, thin and stooped, with the haunted look of someone under tremendous strain. "Professor Kleinmann? Elsa Hoffmann's husband, Thomas Bauer." He introduced himself quietly among the stacks. "I wonder if I might ask your advice about some electrical engineering questions." The professor's eyes darted nervously, but he agreed to speak with Thomas at a secluded reading table. Through carefully phrased questions, Thomas was able to extract critical information about the facility's production capabilities, security protocols, and vulnerable points, all without explicitly asking for classified information. As they parted, Kleinmann gripped Thomas's arm with surprising strength. "Young man, I don't know what your real interest is, but I recognized Hoffmann's work on guidance systems being implemented at the facility, what they're building, the devastation it could cause." He trailed off, looking physically ill. "Thank you for the information, Professor. It will be put to good use." Kleinmann nodded slightly. "Tell Elsa that Gerhardt would have been proud of her." The intelligence Thomas transmitted to London that night was among the most valuable of his mission. Within 2 weeks, the facility was targeted in a precision bombing raid that destroyed the production capability while minimizing civilian casualties. The success came at a cost, however. Security in Heidelberg intensified following the raid. The Gestapo began investigating possible intelligence leaks, and Thomas noticed increased scrutiny of foreigners in the city. Elsa's resistance activities also faced heightened danger. A safe house in Mannheim was discovered, and 2 resistance members were arrested. Through her contacts, Elsa learned that under interrogation, one might have revealed information about other network members. In May, disaster nearly struck. Thomas returned from his banking position to find Maria, the housekeeper, in a state of barely controlled panic. "The Gestapo," she whispered as soon as he entered. "They were here, asking questions about you and Frau Elsa." Thomas's blood ran cold. Where is Elsa now? In the sitting room with them. Jakob took the children through the escape tunnel to the university grounds. Thomas had helped expand the old tunnel that ran from the cellar to a maintenance shed on the university property, never imagining it would be needed so soon. He straightened his tie, assumed the slightly fussy demeanor of a Swiss banker, and entered the sitting room. 2 Gestapo officers in their signature leather coats sat across from Elsa, who maintained a composed facade despite the obvious tension. "Ah, my husband?" Elsa said with remarkable steadiness. "These gentlemen have questions about our marriage." The lead officer, a sharp-featured man named Müller, regarded Thomas with cold suspicion. "Herr Bauer, your marriage to Frau Hoffmann seems quite convenient. A young Swiss banker and an elderly German widow, in the middle of a war." "Love is unpredictable, Officer Müller," Thomas replied with a small smile. "But if you're implying our marriage has financial considerations, you would not be entirely wrong. Elsa provides me with a respectable German home, and I provide financial security in uncertain times. Such arrangements are not unusual." "Indeed, and your work at the bank. It gives you access to information about local businesses, yes?" "Customer confidentiality is sacred in Swiss banking," Thomas answered smoothly. "But yes, I process transactions for many local companies." The questioning continued for nearly an hour, with the officers probing for inconsistencies in their stories. Finally, Müller stood. "Your papers seem in order, Herr Bauer. But these are difficult times, and Switzerland's neutrality only extends so far. We will be watching." After they departed, Elsa collapsed into a chair, the strain finally showing. "They suspect something. But they have no proof," Thomas reassured her, though he was equally shaken. "We need to move the children as soon as possible." "The entire network is at risk," Elsa said. "If they're watching this house," Thomas made a decision. "I can contact my people. They can help evacuate the children to Switzerland." Elsa looked up sharply. "Your people, meaning American intelligence?" "Yes, it's not their usual operation, but—" "No," she interrupted firmly. "Your people want intelligence, not refugees. If you involve them, it will become a bargaining chip. Give us more information and we'll save more children. I've seen how governments operate, Thomas." Her use of his real name underscored the gravity of the moment. Thomas knelt beside her chair. "Then we'll do it ourselves. I have access to funds through the banking channels. We can arrange transportation." Elsa studied his face. "Why would you risk everything? Your mission? Your country's objectives?" Thomas thought of Hannah, of the other children, of the terrible weight of choices in wartime. Because some missions reveal themselves along the way. Saving these children might not have been why I came to Heidelberg, but it's part of why I'm still here. Over the next week, Thomas and Elsa executed a dangerous plan. Using Thomas's banking connections and OSS training, they created false papers for the 6 children currently in their care and 3 more from another compromised safe house. Through Elsa's resistance contacts, they arranged transportation to the Swiss border, bribing officials where necessary with funds Thomas diverted through complex banking transactions. The night before the planned evacuation, Thomas found Hannah sitting alone in the kitchen, clutching her stuffed bear. "Are you ready for the journey tomorrow?" he asked, sitting beside her. She nodded solemnly. "Elsa says we're going somewhere safe." "That's right, Switzerland. There's plenty of food there and no one will hurt you." Hannah looked down at her bear. "Will you come with us?" The question pierced Thomas's heart. "No, Hannah. I have to stay here a little longer." "Because of your job?" "Yes, because of my job." She considered this, then reached out and placed her bear in his hands. "Then Bear will stay with you, so you won't be alone." Thomas swallowed the lump in his throat. "That's very kind, but Bear belongs with you." Hannah shook her head with the absolute certainty of a child. He's brave. He'll help you be brave too." The next morning, a delivery truck arrived at dawn, ostensibly to collect furniture Elsa was selling. The children were hidden inside, with false bottoms in crates constructed by Jakob. Thomas and Elsa watched from the window as the truck pulled away, carrying precious cargo toward what they hoped would be safety. 2 days later, confirmation came through their resistance contacts. All 9 children had successfully crossed into Switzerland. Thomas allowed himself a moment of pure relief before returning to his intelligence duties. The Gestapo's suspicions, however, had not abated. Officer Müller returned several times over the next month, each visit more pointed than the last. Thomas knew their time was running short. He transmitted as much critical intelligence as he could gather, knowing that each report might be his last. In July 1944, the decision was made for Thomas. His handler in London sent an emergency extraction order after learning that Swiss banking authorities, under German pressure, were investigating Thomas Bauer's credentials. His cover was crumbling, and capture would be disastrous not only for Thomas, but for the entire intelligence network. The extraction plan was simple but dangerous. Thomas would travel to neutral Switzerland on banking business and then be smuggled to Allied territory. He had 24 hours to prepare. Telling Elsa was the hardest part. They had moved beyond their arrangement of convenience to become genuine partners in both espionage and rescue. She had become the most unlikely confidant and ally he could have imagined. "I always knew this day would come," she said when he explained, her composure never faltering. "Your work here has been invaluable, Thomas, both your official mission and our additional activities. What will you do?" he asked, concerned for her safety after his departure. "Continue, of course. The work doesn't end until the war ends." She smiled faintly. "Though I shall have to find another young husband for cover. Elsa, the Gestapo's suspicions have always been there in one form or another. I've survived this long. I will manage." Thomas knew arguing was futile. Elsa Hoffmann had made her choice long before he arrived, choosing courage over safety, action over acceptance. The morning of his departure, Thomas left Hannah's bear on Elsa's desk with a note. "To help you be brave too, though you've never needed help with that." As his train pulled away from Heidelberg station, Thomas watched the ancient castle and the hills recede, thinking of the extraordinary widow, who had taught him that heroism wore many disguises, and that true courage often resided in the most unexpected places. The intelligence Thomas Pearson provided during his 10 months in Heidelberg proved crucial to Allied strategic bombing campaigns, significantly disrupting Germany's manufacturing capabilities in the region. His reports on the guidance components facility alone saved countless potential victims of the V-rocket program. What no official record mentioned, however, was the 34 children eventually evacuated through the network Thomas helped strengthen, or the elderly German widow who continued her dangerous work until the Allied liberation. When American forces entered Heidelberg in April 1945, they found Elsa Hoffmann still in her house on Philosophenweg, still standing straight despite the years and hardships, with Hannah's bear sitting prominently on her desk. After the war, Thomas returned to Heidelberg, not as a spy but as part of the occupation administration. He found the city largely intact, having been surrendered without resistance. Elsa's house, however, showed damage from a nearby artillery strike in the war's final days. With trepidation, he knocked on the door, unsure what or whom he would find. When it opened, he was greeted by Maria the housekeeper, now looking much older than her years. "Herr Thomas," she said with the first genuine smile he had ever seen from her. "She's in the garden." Thomas found Elsa tending to a small vegetable patch, her movement slower but her back still remarkably straight for a woman of 70. "Thomas Pearson," she said, without turning around, somehow sensing his presence. "I wondered if you might return. How did you know it was me?" She finally turned, her blue eyes as sharp as ever. "The 70-year-old woman with suspicious activities survives the Gestapo, the bombardments, and the invasion? I assumed I had a guardian angel somewhere pulling strings." Thomas smiled. "I may have mentioned to certain officials that this house and its occupant were valuable assets. Well, your timing is excellent. I've received letters. She led him inside to her study, where a stack of envelopes lay on the desk next to Hannah's bear, now worn with age. From the children. Most made it to Palestine, some to America. Hannah is with a family in New York now. Thomas picked up the bear gently. She was special. They all were, Elsa corrected him, just as all the ones we couldn't save were special. They sat in what had once been their shared sitting room, now showing the effects of war's deprivation, faded fabrics, repairs made with whatever materials were available, empty spaces where paintings or ornaments had once stood. "I came to thank you," Thomas said finally, "for what you taught me." Elsa raised an eyebrow. "And what was that, young man?" "That sometimes the mission you discover matters more than the one you're assigned." She nodded slowly. A lesson many never learn, even in wartime. After a pause, she added, "So what is your mission now, Thomas Pearson?" Thomas looked around the room, at the house that had been both cover and revelation, at the remarkable woman who had shown how ordinary people could defy extraordinary evil through small constant acts of courage. "I think, to remember. To tell the stories that might otherwise be forgotten, the quiet heroism that won't appear in any history books." "A worthy mission," Elsa approved, "though perhaps start with the stories that make old women look a bit less terrifying. I've heard rumors about the fearsome widow Hoffman that would curl your hair." Thomas laughed, catching a glimpse of the dry humor that had sustained her through unimaginable pressure. They talked until evening fell, sharing the stories that couldn't be told during wartime, of close calls and small triumphs, of children saved and lives transformed. Before he left, Thomas asked the question that had lingered in his mind for 2 years. "Were you ever afraid?" Elsa considered this carefully. "Every moment of every day," she admitted, "but fear is a luxury that times like those do not permit us to indulge. So we acknowledge it, then continue despite it." Thomas thought of his OSS training, of the emphasis on courage under fire, of heroic actions. None of it captured the quiet, persistent bravery of this elderly woman who had saved children one by one, day after day, with no recognition and every expectation of eventual capture. "The world should know what you did," he said. "The children know," Elsa replied simply. "That is enough. As history records the great battles, the political decisions and the military strategies that shaped the outcome of the Second World War, it often overlooks the Thomas Pearsons and Elsa Hoffmans, the individuals who found their own private wars to fight within the larger conflict. Their victories were measured not in territory gained or enemies defeated, but in lives preserved and humanity affirmed in the face of industrial-scale inhumanity. The marriage of convenience between a young American spy and an elderly German widow, begun as mutual exploitation, transformed into something neither could have anticipated, a partnership that saved lives, gathered crucial intelligence, and revealed that heroism often wears the most unassuming disguises. In the great moral crucible of war, both discovered that true courage is found not in fearlessness, but in continuing forward despite fear, guided by the simple conviction that some actions are necessary regardless of their cost. Thomas Pearson returned to America after his work in occupied Germany concluded. He never married, but dedicated his post-war career to diplomatic service, working particularly on refugee resettlement programs. On his desk at the State Department, he kept a well-worn teddy bear with a Star of David, a reminder that even in history's darkest chapters, light could be found in the most unexpected places. Elsa Hoffman remained in Heidelberg until her death in 1952. Her funeral was attended by university colleagues, neighbors, and a surprisingly large number of young adults who traveled from Israel, America, and across Europe to pay their respects to the stern German widow who had once sheltered them in a cellar. None of her official records or obituaries mentioned her wartime activities. As she had told Thomas, the children knowing was enough. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.